Thank you for joining us. I'm Jennifer Homendy, and I'm chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB. Today's Labor Day. Many people are off of work, kids are out of school, families are getting together, going to the beach, going to the pool. We saw many paddleboarding, going to barbecues, festivals. Not these families. Today is a day, just like every other day since September 2nd, 2019, that is marked with grief. Tremendous, unimaginable pain every day. Because today marks the 5th anniversary since the fire on board the small passenger vessel, the Conception, off the coast of Santa Cruz Island. That fire took the lives of 33 passengers and 1 crew member. The NTSB was on scene. I was the board member on scene. I was not chair at the time. For the NTSB, this was the worst marine disaster that the NTSB has investigated since it was established in 1967. Alfaro was the second. The worst. Now, a year later, we issued a final report. And in that final report, we issued recommendations to the U.S. Coast Guard and many others. They have acted on some of our recommendations with respect to fire and smoke detectors, with respect to emergency egress, with not having to have obstructions when you are trying to escape. Though we've asked, how are they enforcing these standards? We have not received information on that, and I hope we will. Why we're here today is what the Coast Guard has not done, and what the NTSB has been demanding for over 20 years. And that is issuance of a regulation that requires owners of U.S. flagged passenger vessels to implement a safety management system, or SMS. Now, what is SMS? It's not burdensome. It's common sense. In marine safety, SMS deals with compliance with existing regulations. It also establishes rules and procedures for safe operations. It delineates what crew members' responsibilities and duties are. Training that must take place. What drills must take place, roving patrols that must be on duty, especially at night. But this recommendation for SMS, like I said, isn't new. The NTSB first issued this recommendation following a passenger ferry accident in New York in 2003. That killed 11 people, 11 passengers, and injured 70 others. We issued it again in 2012 after another passenger ferry accident. Injured 50 passengers. After the 2003 tragedy, the Coast Guard said it didn't have authority to require U.S. flagged vessels carrying passengers, including ferries, to implement SMS, or safety management systems. So Congress gave it to them. Congress gave the authority to the Coast Guard in 2010. Coast Guard sent the NTSB a letter in 2013 and said, we're working on a rulemaking. And then they went silent. That second ferry accident occurred. We called on them again, implement SMS. Then in 2018, again, when the Island Lady, a passenger vessel that transported people from land out to casinos on board vessels, went on fire. 15 passengers were injured, 1 died. We called on the Coast Guard to require SMS again. No action. Then in 2019, the Conception, 34 people died. We have issued this recommendation time and again, over 2 decades. How many times does the NTSB have to issue this recommendation again before Coast Guard will take action? How many deaths have to occur? How many injuries have to occur? How many families have to stand up here at a press conference grieving for their loved ones before action is taken? And how many times does Congress, which did it again in 2021, tell the Coast Guard to take action? How many times do they have to do that? Now, the Coast Guard in 2021 issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking on this issue. What is that? They asked the community questions. What should be included in our rulemaking? We've heard nothing since January of 2021, only that we're working on it. Every once in a while, I hear the arguments of cost. This is the cost. This is the cost. Let me read to you the cost. The cost is J.P. Hopelto, Patricia Beitzinger, Neil Baltz, Mary Beth Guiney, Charlie McIlvain, McIlvain, Kendra and Scott Chan, Justin Dignam, Lisa Fiedler, Christy Finstad, Yuko Hatano. The cost is Vaidehi Campbell-Williams, Adrian DeHood Fritz, Andrew Fritz, Yulia Krashanaya, and Dan Garcia, Ali Kurtz, Shong Lin. The cost is Sunil Sandhu, Carrie McLaughlin, Christian Takvam, the Salaika family, Diana, Steve, and Tia. Tia was on the Conception celebrating her 17th birthday with her friend, Berenice Felipe, 16 years old. The cost is Kaustab Nirmal and Sanjiri Satish Dipujari, the Kitasol family, Michael, Firnisa, Evan Michael, Angela, and Nicole, Ted Strom, and Wei Tan. What if this was your family? What if this was your family? People ask me all the time, what keeps you up at night? The next family. The next family we have to tell, tragedy occurred and we're investigating. The loss that occurred here on September 2nd, 2019 keeps them up at night. Now, I sent a letter to the Coast Guard on this a year ago. I released a letter today, or I'm going to after this press conference, a letter to Secretary Mayorkas from the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Coast Guard Commandant, Linda Fagan. I talked to Secretary Mayorkas on Thursday, asking, begging him to intervene and get the Coast Guard to take action. I talked to the Deputy Commandant for Operations with the Coast Guard a few weeks ago. I hope to talk to the Commandant. I've requested that. I also talked to Congressman Carbajal from this district, who's been a champion on this issue. We hope this spurs action, because this should never, ever happen again. I'm going to ask Vicky Moore first if she can make some remarks as well.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Vicky Moore, and my loved ones are right here. My daughter, Kendra, who is 26, and my husband of 35 years, Scott Jan. And I'm here also amongst family members who could make it today, representing the Advocacy 34 community, which is what we have formed to assure, just as Chairperson Homendy said, to not allow this to ever happen to any family member again, because we know exactly what it's like, and it is a loss that you carry for the rest of your life. We wouldn't wish that on anyone. And our mission is to assure the enactment and enforcement of safety standards and regulations for small passenger vessels so that, again, this tragedy never happens. And we are very proud to be very forcefully supporting 2 federal bills that did pass, the Small Passenger Safety Act of 2020 and the Small Passenger Liability Fairness Act of 2021. And we do thank Representative Carbajal and the late Senator Dianne Feinstein for authoring those bills. I also just wanted to address an issue that has come up quite frequently over the years, which is when this tragedy is called an accident. And it absolutely was not an accident. It was a disaster simply waiting to happen. As we know, there is a reason for safety regulations and laws and rules, and when you don't follow them, it's a matter of time before lives are lost. And that's exactly what happened. And in the case of the Conception, these laws were ignored for decades. It's a roll of the dice when a disaster is going to happen. And of course, the conviction of Captain Boylan, criminal conviction for gross negligence, also proves this was not an accident. This was purposeful, negligent behavior. And it goes without saying that if the law was followed, our loved ones would be here with us today. And the third thing I wanted to say is that we are also going to be working with Chairperson Homendy and others in Representative Carvajal's office as our group, our Advocacy 34 group, to ask the difficult questions. Why is it taking so long? Why has this been ignored? What is going on with the Coast Guard? It's been 23 years after all, and I have to second everything that Chairperson Homendy just said. There's no reason, there is no rational reason for this to be delayed. There appears to be issues around cost-benefit analyses. And when I hear about cost-benefit analysis, when it comes to safety standards that save people's lives, I have to question, what type of moral compass are we talking about here? What is the ethical standard that equates common sense safety regulations that should be adopted across the board, no-brainer type of regulations that we're referring to here? How do you equate the delay that's taking place with the fact that more lives may be lost? There's something else going on here, and we're just kind of fed up with it, frankly. So I want to thank Chairperson Homendy for her leadership in championing this. We are incredibly grateful for what she's doing to bring light to this, and we hope to continue to make some progress moving forward here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vicky. I now want to ask if Kathy McIlvaine would like to come up and say a few words as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen McIlvaine. This is my husband, Clark. Our youngest son, Charlie, was one of the 34 victims of the Conception disaster. Today, on the 5th anniversary of the tragedy, we are gathering to remember our loved ones. We say to ourselves, how can it be 5 years that we awoke to the most horrific day of our lives? And yet there's nothing about that morning about the weeks and months that followed that aren't embedded in our minds forever. While awaiting justice for our loved ones, the families of the 34 victims turned our anguish into action. We began advocating the U.S. Coast Guard to implement additional, sensible, life-saving regulations. Our hope was that no other family would feel this pain. There has been some progress made, thanks to Chair Homendy, we so appreciate. And some regulations that Congress mandated in 2020 have been implemented, but others have not. One very important regulation that has not been implemented is the Safety Management System, or SMS, as Chair Homendy has said. And SMS promotes a culture of safety. It helps assess and mitigate risks and ensures that crews are trained to respond to emergencies, including fires. The NTSB has recommended implementation of an SMS for over 23 years, and still it's not a regulation. As we have done the past 5 years, we once again urge the U.S. Coast Guard to implement a regulation making an SMS mandatory now. Because it was not a Coast Guard regulation, none of these safety components existed among the crew of the Conception. There were multiple failures that tragic morning of the fire. Most glaringly, no roving watch was assigned by Captain Jerry Boylan, as required by law. Fires demand early detection and aggressive suppression to be contained. If an SMS had been required, the crew would have been aware of the inherent risks. They would have been properly trained and prepared to respond to all emergencies, including fire. And we may not be standing here today on September 2nd, 5 years later, grieving again, every day, our loved ones. But today, it's especially difficult. They were not trained, and with no guidance from Captain Boylan, who was the first to abandon the vessel while our loved ones were still alive, they had no idea what to do. We can't change the past, but we can continue to advocate for stronger maritime safety regulations in their honor and hopefully save future lives. Thank you.
I want to see if others would like to make a comment at all. Don't want to overlook anyone. And we also have one of the responders as well here. Thank you. So with that, I will open it up to questions. I will call on you. Please state your name and your affiliation. Yes, ma'am.
I'm with KYT, News Channel 3, and I was actually in the Channel Islands Harbor when they were finding out how fatal this was. And someone brought it to my attention that you can have videos to make sure a night watchman is being watched by someone on land. Is that even something that you guys have talked about?
So that is required right now by the Coast Guard. Congress mandated it. The Coast Guard implemented it through an interim final rule. However, we've asked them how they are enforcing that and waiting for information on their enforcement.
And could you reiterate, so many people don't believe it's a trash can, they believe it was too much plugged into an old boat, like many garage fires are started. Can you reiterate what you believe?
Well, the NTSB did substantial analysis. The question is on what started the fire. The NTSB did a lot of analysis. We ruled out many things. And it came down to us concluding it was either electrical, a trash can where there may have been smoking, with cigarettes or something in it, but more than likely lithium-ion batteries that were charging in the salon at the time from the photography equipment, the diving equipment, phones, etc. Yes, sir.
John Patrick Lewis, ABC 7, Los Angeles. Can you go over what changes have occurred in regulations over the last 5 years? And
What?
are local voting companies instituting their own voluntary measures that you know of?
What safety standards have come into play since the 2019 tragedy? Congress mandated that the Coast Guard take action. The Coast Guard did implement in a final rule some of what Congress mandated, including interconnected smoke and fire alarms, meaning if one goes off in one area, you can hear it in another area, including in accommodation spaces. Implemented a secondary egress for emergencies that is not in the same location as the primary exit. Prohibited obstructions to exit, like doors and hatches. But Congress required more, we recommended more, and we need to see final action. On safety management systems, these are programs in place, these are policies, procedures that companies have that set forth training. They set forth emergency drills. It establishes duties of crew members. And we've been asking for this for over 2 decades, but again and again, and we found in our report that had Truth Aquatics had a safety management system, there would have been a roving patrol. It would have called for a roving patrol. Now, as far as you also asked the question on who has implemented it voluntarily, that's a great question for the Coast Guard and how they enforce some of the things that have been required so far. I will tell you on safety management systems, the Staten Island ferries, for example, have implemented a voluntary safety management system. There's no standards for that. It's not enforceable by the Coast Guard, but they have taken action. I hope others will as well. Did you have another question?
Yeah. How much would you estimate this would cost a ship that size? I mean, how much more are we talking with all this? If you had your way and you had everything on there, you know, how much are we talking more would it cost the company?
How much would it cost the company to have a safety management system? It's policies and procedures in place that you implement. It's part of having safe operations. This is the cost of doing nothing.
There's been a big accident, you know, off the seas that took a billionaire and his daughter. Did that bring this to the forefront before this 5th anniversary for you?
You're speaking, the question was on the tragedy in Italy?
Yes.
No, I am in constant contact with the families. For me, I was on scene. This is not just something that the NTSB wants. This is not a job for me. This is a passion. And when the NTSB investigates and when we make recommendations, safety change doesn't happen until those recommendations are implemented. And that's what we're calling for. We exist to save lives. And so we're going to continue day after day, month after month, year after year if we have to, as the NTSB, to advocate, to work with the families, to ensure safety change, to save a life. Yes, ma'am.
Rebecca Caraway with News Talk. Has the Coast Guard given you a reason for why these changes haven't been implemented?
The question is, has the Coast Guard given us a reason on why they have not implemented safety management systems or SMS? We do not know. I do not know. But here we are, over 20 years later, from our first recommendation on passenger vessels involving ferries. Then we expanded it to all passenger vessels, including small passenger vessels, in 2013. We've done it time and again. How many times do we have to do that? There's no excuse for it taking this long. No reason. Others?
Jennifer, what would you say to the public about the reviewing what vessels they get on then?
The question is, what would I say to the public about getting on small passenger vessels or passenger vessels? Like anything, there's a risk, and you have to evaluate that. But here's the thing. When you get on a small passenger vessel, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about, is a life jacket available? Do I have that? Of course you're thinking of that. That's what anyone would. You're not thinking about, is there a fire alarm that's going to go off? Are they going to hear it in the sleeping berth, 2 levels up from me? You're not thinking about, have they done emergency drills? Have they had the right training? Do they know they have to have a roving patrol? Families don't even know that they have to have a roving patrol. You shouldn't have to. You should not have to know this. And so that is where the federal government has failed. If the companies aren't going to do it, who's there to protect safety? In this case, the U.S. Coast Guard, the Department of Homeland Security. They are the last line of defense here. You shouldn't have to worry about that when you're a family or you're taking any of these excursions. You should not have to worry, are my kids going to come home tonight? Is my husband going to come home tonight? Is my wife going to come home tonight? Is my sister going to come home tonight? My brother, my son, my daughter. You should never have to worry about that. I am begging the Coast Guard to take action, for the Secretary of Homeland Security to intervene. We cannot have another one of these. We cannot see another death.
When was your last meeting with them, and what's the dialogue been like? I mean, what's the holdup?
The NTSB meets with the Coast Guard regularly. We have, the question is, what's the holdup? When did we last meet with them? The NTSB meets with the Coast Guard regularly to see what they're doing on our recommendations. We have a safety recommendations team and a safety advocacy team. And they say they're working on it, but we have no idea what stage this is in. What they issued was an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. What we're waiting for is eventually a final rule. That's when the regulation gets implemented. But in between there, we still need a notice of proposed rulemaking. So what we're talking about here is years away. They've wasted time. They're wasting time now. Take action.
Last question.
Ma'am.
Why is Captain Boylan still out of prison?
The question is on the captain and his status. The NTSB is solely focused on safety, not something that we are involved in. Just our mandate is safety, not criminal. But I'm sure some of the families would be willing to chat with you after. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining.